Hey guys, this is Justin. Hello and welcome to another video. So we're continuing our hashtag AskX series. You have a question you'd like to see answered? Well, consider leaving it down below with the hashtag AskX and maybe I will get to it. We've got some fun topics, or at least one topic. We'll see how long that goes for today's video. But just quickly, if you want to support the channel, I put together an Amazon wish list of all the books we've read on our podcast, Tap Calf Transmissions. There's a second one for the ones that I most highly recommend. I'll link to both down in the description. If you're going to buy anything on Amazon, even if it's not those books, click the link. I get a portion. Otherwise, if you don't want to buy anything but just want the list for book recommendations, totally feel free to do that. The library is a great resource. But this first question is really interesting and one I've seen a few times. Dog Lovers Rule, great name, asks, can you please do a video on logistics in Star Wars? It's a severely underrated and undercovered topic. And you know what? I completely agree. Logistics is a really broad topic, so I'll cover a few different aspects of it. If there's something you'd like to see more in depth, let me know, because truly logistics can be everything from how the galaxy as a whole operates on a day-to-day basis, how military fleets maintain their ready level, how information travels across the galaxy. I think you get it. Part of the problem with logistics is that Star Wars isn't usually that kind of story, unless it needs to be. There are a few exceptions though, for better or for worse, and let's talk about some of those first. On the bad side of logistics, one novel that I think does a really poor job with sort of the operation of the galaxy as a whole is The High Republic, The Eye of Darkness. Now, I know it's kind of popular to rip on the High Republic, and I get that because The Eye of Darkness was actually the novel that kind of pushed me away from the series. I'd been thinking about dropping it. This book really didn't work for me, and it was in large part because of a central premise which I considered to be ridiculous. So the novel is largely about the creation of the Nihil Occlusion Zone. Basically, this rogue pirate group cut off a large portion of space through what was known as the Storm Wall, basically a barrier across sectors of space which destroys starships. And the book really fails to handle this in an interesting way. More details on that can be found in my review of it, but you know, there's a lot you could really go into about how planets suffer, how some planets actually succeed within the occlusion zone, and how that shapes galactic politics. The book isn't written very well in my opinion. The occlusion zone is never handled in an intelligent way, and it's just an example of bad logistics on a galactic scale in Star Wars. You know, that's not always been the case in new canon. One major element of logistics is hyperspace routes. Star Wars canon has, in several occasions, as has Legends, used gravitic mines or other interdictor technologies to mine hyperspace routes, cutting off sections of the galaxy, albeit only temporarily. Sometimes a gravity mine will just rip a ship out of space. The ship has to re-enter hyperspace. It's really just slowing it down. Other times there will be a trap or a toll of some sort. And I believe it was the Grisk even used things like asteroids, which are obviously more difficult to get around. All of this is made more interesting when it comes to places like the unknown regions or even the deep core, where hyperspace lanes are shifting, they are unreliable. That, in Star Wars Legends, set up one of the most interesting battles, at least of the Yuuzhan Vong War, the Battle of Ebak. I've talked about this a few times, but basically the New Republic used interdicted hyperlanes and secret routes to surprise the Vong with a massive force and thus dealt a critical blow which really turned the war. Now, is this an example of logistics? I mean, sort of, more so military strategy. The Yuuzhan Vong War, however, is big on logistics, especially, somewhat surprisingly, from the Yuuzhan Vong side. They have a very unique position where they can grow their technology, so a big part of the initial Yuuzhan Vong invasion is establishing ship wombs and biot grow facilities on fertile worlds. However, especially as the war goes on, their production capability actually outpaces the training and growth of their new soldiers, and the only thing they could really do to encourage that was basically allow Yuuzhan Vong soldiers to breed as much as they wanted to, but given that they're essentially human in biology, the fruit of those seeds, yes, would have been many years away. But on a logistical side, a lot of the early to mid-war is also about isolating New Republic shipyards. A lot of that unfortunately happens sort of off page, or we just see allusions to it, but it's still pretty interesting. And this sort of ties back to something I mentioned earlier. Logistics are often only brought up when they become a point of conflict. All of these things work when they work. Hyperspace lanes work, comms work until they don't. Then it becomes the center of a novel. And continuing in the Yuuzhanvong War, a really good example of that is the Second Battle of Bilbringi, which we actually see in the second to final New Jedi Order novel. In that, the Yuuzhanvong target HoloNet relays across the galaxy, and it actually foils a very complex New Republic, or actually at this point Galactic Alliance plan to take the Yuuzhanvong out at Bilbringi. Essentially, Wedge Antilles is leading a fleet at Bilbringi. He's expecting 2 Yuuzhanvong forces to essentially pincer him. Then he gives the command to waiting fleets, 1 Imperial, a 2nd GA, to come in and help when the time is right, with the caveat, if we don't call, we've been overwhelmed, the forces are too strong, don't bother. Of course, the HoloNet goes down and communication becomes impossible, so Wedge is left to die. Sort of. We learn in Star Wars that there are other methods of communication aside from the HoloNet. You can imagine the HoloNet as a phone or internet system, relays sending your messages high-powered across the galaxy. There are also, and the new canon Thrawn trilogy actually goes into this quite significantly, other methods of communicating, short burst, etc., but they all rely on proximity. So what does the fleet do? Well, they send a runner, basically a courier ship, because although the HoloNet is down, ships are still working, hyperdrives still move faster than the speed of light. So, shocker, thanks to the Millennium Falcon, the GA still is successful here, despite suffering a major setback when it comes to logistics. And the Yuuzhanvong War has multiple moments like this, partially because the technology that the Yuuzhanvong use are completely alien to the galaxy, so you can take down the HoloNet and not also cripple your own forces. Although other bits of technology, like hyperspace, despite having different names, operate the exact same. Alright, 2 more points regarding logistics. The first is fleet tenders, and fleet tenders exist quite significantly within the lore. They're meant to replenish warships as well as their starfighter escorts. You can imagine they have everything from extra munitions to food, to things needed for repairs, and you'd attach fleet tenders to large fleets, especially mobile ones. And you may not be surprised if you've been paying attention to these videos, especially when I discuss military topics. The only real book that mentions fleet tenders, or the only real books, come from the Black Fleet trilogy, which is written more like military fiction than most Star Wars novels. In the Black Fleet trilogy, at least for parts of it, we follow the New Republic 5th Fleet, which is completely mobile, it roves across the galaxy, and it has numerous fleet tenders attached to it, which is kind of cool because the 5th Fleet is all brand new ships, and that includes the fleet tenders. And it is pretty cool to see how the ships set up before battle, how communication works across battle lines. So again, if you're interested in logistics, read those novels. But Star Wars also does have a lot of magic. Like, many of these starships must have some sort of special compactors or Star Trek-like technology, because the ships are said to be able to operate for months, if not years, many of them without needing any sort of resupplies. The final thing I wanted to mention was freighters. If you've only watched the movies, you're probably just thinking of ships like the Millennium Falcon or even the Lucrehulk, and both of those certainly were freighters of different size. But in the expanded universe, there are lots of other interesting options. Probably the most famous would be the BFF-1. Very iconic design. It's appeared in so many different video games. I promise, once you see it, go back and play TIE Fighter, you'll see it everywhere, especially when you're playing 90s and early 2000s Star Wars games. We see in Star Wars Rebels the Class 4 transport. I really like this design. It's basically the space version of a big sea freighter. Very cool. But one of my favorites has to be the field secured container vessel. I actually did an entire video on this thing. It could be massive. The sourcebook implies perhaps greater than 25 kilometers long. Basically, it was a set of engines with modular pods attached to it, which could be filled with anything. In a galaxy as big as we're talking about with Star Wars, you need big ships to move tons and tons of resources around. So I love this design. It'd be really cool to see it in a video game, I think. But if you do like freighters, you like supply ships, definitely play the TIE Fighter game or X-Wing Alliance. Lots of just random cool little ships just doing their own commercial business that you get to scan or whatever else. But that's all I've got, guys. Thanks so much for watching. I thought maybe we'd get to a second question today, but we didn't. I'll see you guys soon. May the Force be with you.